Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Conway, and I'm a professional animator from the East Coast. But today I'm putting on a little bit different of a hat as I start my journey in indie game development. There are a few games that inspire me, the biggest of which being Payday 2, which I've played for hours and hours on end. And driving past those self-storage units, I always thought that would make a great level. To go in and you could open up the different units and it'd be random what you got inside. So when I set out to make this game, I knew exactly what theme I wanted to go with. So this is DevLog number 1 for my first game, Heist. I started out with taking a character I had from a previous game I was developing, and I began mapping out the general feel that I wanted. And it was pretty basic. You'd be in front of these units, and you'd be able to move left and right from screen to screen. To be a timer on top and a screen in front to have a little minigame to unlock the unit. So then I hopped into Photoshop and started to flesh out the design that I had in my head and experiment a bit. And I know a lot of game developers probably say that you should get the bones of the game worked out before you start implementing all this art. But again, as an animator, this is really where I shine more, having no prior experience in coding at all. So adding final art to the game early on, or rather more polished art to the game early on, allowed me to get a sense of accomplishment that I wouldn't necessarily have having to spend an entire day on a single mechanic with coding. One of the ideas that came to mind was that being in there would kind of be like a maze, so a lot of the screens would look the same, and it would be up to the player to keep track of how far away they were from the exit. After some development, this is the screen that I concluded on implementing into the game at start. So I fired up Unity and realized that I didn't even know how to apply a sprite to a game object. But after a while and some Googling, I was able to come up with this. 3 scenes with the character in different spots for each. So I started a Trello board and mapped out the entirety of what I thought the game development would be, and I'd be able to set it to green, yellow, red, or whatever color, depending on how far along with that goal I thought I was. So creating the basic scene was yellow, and it was time to work on moving. Now, in my head, the player would be able to press a button on screen or use the arrow keys to transition between the different cameras, and there'd probably be a transition animation, and then they'd be on the next screen. Because again, the main sort of gameplay would be these mini games in which you'd play to unlock the storage units. And this was a challenge right off the bat, because as I jumped into code, I had no idea what I was doing. And I went on forums, and I watched tutorials, and I got error after error message, until I finally came across a forum post where a guy gave out some code which would let me pick which key I could press to go to the next camera, which key I could press to go to the previous camera, how many cameras there were, and which number correlated to which camera. So this was exactly what I was looking for. So now I could move theoretically left and right and cycle back to the first camera. And that was thanks to this user on the Unity forums. But I made a small tweak to his code that would just prevent me from moving to the next camera if I was in the last one on the list, and to the previous camera if I was on the first one on the list, essentially boxing me into the level. I used Unity's basic UI creation to create a Heist complete screen. I wrote out some basic code to make it appear when I attempted to leave the screen. And it worked, except I could still move around. Typically on missions, after you exit, they don't really let you continue to move. So I implemented a little code that would hold me in position and stop me from moving. So I totally made and didn't take this image off of Google, but I used some images of cell bars to create a Heist failed screen, and implementing some more code. When we go off screen, it would say Heist complete, and when we'd hit J, so I went back into the code, and now when we hit J, we get a Heist failed screen. So now we had our mission passed and our mission failed screen. Of course, there was no real indication on what moving off the screen was. It was just something that I knew as a developer. So now I was able to consider what I considered Alpha 0.1 death and Alpha 0.1 goal as complete, and I marked those off on my Trello. Next, I wanted to create a basic HUD. I followed a tutorial to get a nice timer up there, and I edited around a bit so that now when the timer hits 0 and you are still in the game, the heist fails. But I could still move around. And after some fiddling with that, now when the heist fails, you are stuck there. So I created a little more assets for the HUD to flesh it out a bit. And it was time to hop back into Photoshop. And I took the original sprite sheet that I had of this character and created a simple idle animation. I brought it into Unity, split up the sprite, and created the first animation in the game. Now I wanted to offset his hand slightly to the body to add a little bit of weight to it. It doesn't look exactly like I was hoping, but I think it's good for now. And who knows, it might even stay until the final version. So I replaced all the guys, one in the far left, one in the middle, and one on the far right, so you can get a little bit more feel on which screen you're at. So it was time to make the lockers interactable, which was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I watched a lot of tutorials and looked through a lot of forums to try to figure out how to make the lockers clickable. But I started out by removing all the lockers from the screen and adding a locker back as a game object. For some reason my HUD became black, and it kind of just fixed itself later. But as I said, I looked through a lot of forums and got a lot of errors trying to find out how to click on this object and remove it from the screen. But in the end, I was able to find an extremely basic code. On mouse down, destroy game object. And of course, it worked. So with a slight edit to that, I was able to change the sprite to another sprite, effectively making it grayed out. So I duplicated that 8 times and removed the background to the background so that I could have the garage behind the background and still be able to click on it. And that was essentially Alpha 0.1 complete. I had a timer at the top. I was able to click on all the lockers. I was able to complete the heist, and it would stop the timer, no longer giving me the heist failed while the heist was complete screen. Likewise, I could click on the lockers, and if I did not make it off the screen before the timer ran out, the heist would fail, essentially stopping me from completing the heist. Now, I know this is extremely basic, and I'm sure a lot of the professional coders out there are probably laughing at the code and the amount of time it took me to make such a simple, essential prototype. But again, I have no formal education in coding. Everything that I've attributed to this game has been through the help of tutorials and the forums, and this gave me a major rush being able to essentially have a game. If you really think about it, this is a game. You're able to go in, do something, and win or fail, depending on a timer. In a way, this is my first game completed. But we still got a lot left to do. So that is DevLog 1 for my game, Shutter Heist. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for the game, leave those down in the comments below.